when people present their own claims, just because an adjuster tells you, the claim is denied, or it doesn't mean it really is. There's many times I've gotten liability decisions reversed.
Welcome to This Week in Trucking. I'm Amy. Today we're joined by Jennifer Anderson, your Fractional Claims Recovery Officer, founder and CEO of Claims Shield. Jennifer has spent over 20 years working inside the claims world, helping commercial fleets recover money after accidents. Money that small carriers are often entitled to but never realize they can claim. If you've ever been in an accident, dealt with insurance, or had a truck down, or cash flow take a hit, this conversation is something you don't want to miss. But before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update and conversations like this one. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into it, Jennifer. You've spent over 20 years working in claims. How did you get into this side of the industry, and what made you focus specifically on fleets?
I started out in claims with State Farm Insurance. So I started there handling claims, all types of auto claims, bodily injury claims, uninsured motorist, no fault litigation, all that stuff. And once State Farm started consolidating, I had to leave because I wasn't mobile. And when I left there, I sort of missed being in claims. And there was an opening for a claims manager position at a moving company, a local moving company. So I took that, and I guess that introduced me to, the commercial vehicles and the semi-tractor trailers. And I started handling household good claims for a moving company, for damages to those types of, furniture, anything packed away for a move, which was very interesting. I never heard the word chargeback before then, which is definitely an interesting concept. I'm not sure where else you can damage something or, make a mistake during your job and, you have to pay for it.
And then I also saw you work with some nonprofits. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So when we do our closed file reviews, there are some nonprofits that on the bottom of our flyer, it says, mention the nonprofit. And when we send your first check, we'll send them a check too. So the nonprofits that we work with are Move for Hunger, Truckers Against Trafficking, Safe Moves for Seniors, and our newest nonprofit is Blessings in a Backpack. So we're happy to give back when we can during those closed file reviews.
And could you tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks right now, how it looks right now, and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I basically help businesses with commercial vehicles. So it could be an insurer of commercial vehicles. It could be, a business with just regular vehicles, cars on the road, or up to tractor trailers. Those are my favorite. And then, I make sure whenever there's an accident that the companies are getting everything they're entitled to. And if they have prior accidents, we come in and do a closed file review to make sure, same thing, they got everything. There's no money hiding in those closed claims.
Yeah, mostly on this channel, we have a lot of single truck, 1 to 2 truck owner operators. And we get some questions about what is something they can do, or what's something a little bit of a checklist after they're involved in an accident. Maybe a small fleet owner is involved in an accident that's not their fault. What's the biggest mistake they can make right after the accident?
Yeah. So, starting at the scene of the accident, I've spoken with owner operators and they say, oh, my company told me just to get the DOT number. So they get a DOT number, and yes, we can search and see who the company is. But, as you can imagine, they'll deny the accident happened. We don't have the name of the driver. We don't, we're missing a lot of things. So I always say, pictures are great. Take a picture of the cab card, take a picture of the insurance card, take a picture of the other driver's driver license, take a picture of the vehicles at the scene, the way they are when contact was made before anybody moves their vehicle, to show there's contact. Because when we talk to the other company, they're going to say, oh, we had no vehicles in that area at the time, right? But pictures don't lie.
We had a carrier on a few days ago when we were talking about that as well. Would you say cameras on the trailer and on the rigs are a must-have nowadays?
Oh, for sure. And, sometimes we'll see dash cams though, and, there'll be a hit and run and we're trying to identify, and it'll be blurry, or, it's raining, so it's hard to see. It's not going to hurt to spend more money for a better dash cam. I don't know too much about them and what the options are out there, but just make sure it's activated at all times, and, you know, it gets the information that's needed.
And then sometimes most owner operators could think that insurance will handle everything. Where would you say that assumption usually goes wrong?
Okay, so when you say insurance will handle everything, I see that as, if I'm at fault and I'm telling you, oh, my insurance will handle it. That's how I take that. You're not at fault and you're presenting a claim against someone else's insurance. Okay, I guess the first thing I'll think of is, okay, you want your repairs, right? So sometimes insurance companies, you submit an estimate. They'll write their own estimate. They'll audit your estimate and send you what they think you should be paid. And they're not going to tell you, oh, you might be entitled to loss of use, or you might be entitled to this, or diminished value. They're not going to present the claim for you. So if you just have that mindset, insurance will handle it. If you don't know what you're entitled to, you're not going to get it. If you don't ask for it, you won't get it.
Could you let us know a bit about what types of money carriers are typically entitled to after an accident that they don't realize they can actually recover?
So, I mean, it would depend on where the accident occurred, what state it occurred. It would be great if everything was uniform and every state was the same, but it's not. Some of the most common things are loss of use, diminished value, lost revenue. Those are things depending on how severe the accident was and where the accident occurred. That might be other things, other claims that can be made.
Could you explain to us a bit more in simpler terms what is loss of use and why it matters so much for carriers who run under their own authority?
Yeah, sure. So loss of use is simply the loss of use of or enjoyment of your property. So it's when somebody else takes that away from you due to their negligence. So typically if you have a tractor trailer, for example, that's being repaired, that length of time that it's being repaired, you're out, you're the loss of that property, your enjoyment of it, and that could be a valid claim, and often is, depending on the situation and where the accident happened. A lot of the pushback I get too from carriers is, well, this is one of my favorites. They'll say, well, the driver has a reset. He or she can get it repaired during their reset. And no, that's not how it works. And a lot of times, there's a sleeper in there. So these drivers, they'll cook in there, they'll sleep in there. I mean, that right there is their enjoyment of it. You're taking away, their home. That's where they live while they're at work.
Could you tell us a bit more about how does diminished value work for trucks?
I'll give an example. Let's say you're in the market for a tractor, $100,000 tractor, right? And you go to the lot and there's two available. So let's say me and you, we're both there. We're looking at these two tractors, both the same, identically the same. One was involved in an accident and one wasn't. Which one are you going to offer to purchase?
The one that hasn't gotten into an accident. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say we're down there. I offer to purchase it first, and I buy it. And the sales guy tells you, oh, we just sold it. We have this one though, perfectly repaired. It was involved in an accident, repaired properly. Everything's the same. How much would you offer for that one?
We said, what was the original price? Sorry,
100,000.
100,000. Do we need to offer less?
What would you offer? What? Yeah. How much?
98.
Okay. So you offering $2,000 less, that right there is the diminished value. It's the amount that somebody will offer because of the accident. And There's a few different types of diminished value claims. The one specifically that we go after is inherent diminished value. And it just means that's basically like the stigma value because the car's been involved in an accident and it's just like the same as a new one.
For owner operators who haul cargo, how often do you see cargo claims mishandled or underpaid maybe?
Say if they're a mover and there's cargo claims, when I first started Claim Shield, this is primarily what I was focusing on. If they're an agent for a van line, let's say, and a claim is paid and there's a chargeback to that owner operator for damages, right? Let's say they dropped a TV. Okay, it happens. Things happen. If let's say the TV, $2,500 was paid out for the TV. Sometimes you could find a TV for maybe $1,000 and you could dispute that. So sometimes more on the owner operator side, I've seen where claims might be more has been paid out. And that's what I started doing. I started disputing that and getting that reduced.
That's interesting because it does come into this next question, which it's a question I've had since we've started talking to carriers years ago. At what point does a carrier bring in a claims recovery expert like you instead of trying to handle it themselves?
They should always have somebody like me. I'm really like a third-party claims administrator for the recovery side. So I don't charge a fee unless there's a recovery. So there's really no downside to having somebody like me on their side. We did, for a moving company, we did a closed file review. And from one claim, we were able to recover $7,700. So a payment was made to a shipper for damage to their cargo. And we got that back for them. That was $4,700. And then we also got back loss of use for their trailer for the time that it was down being repaired. To think, though, that the moving company did make a claim, but only for the repairs. So if you don't know you're entitled to other things, you're losing money.
That's another question that comes up a lot too, is how long after a claim is closed can carriers still recover money when they're owed but never recovered the money?
So that would depend on where the accident happened, which state. Every state has a different statute of limitations, so that would depend. But initially, when I come in to work with a client, I'll go back a couple of years, and again, depending on where the accident occurred, and take a look to see what was paid, if anything. It's everybody's so busy today, right? If there's an accident, they need to repair it, get things repaired. They might pay out of pocket and, go on. There's jobs and work and get back on the road. And then unless there's somebody, back in the office submitting the claims, that might just get lost and pushed to the side and never recovered. So
Yeah. What would you say is something carriers should change around accidents and claims that could have an impact on their profit? Because we're talking about the accident happens and we want to move fast and get it repaired and get it moving, and then we forget about the money we can recover. What's one tip you could give out for carriers to do around accidents and claims?
yeah, so honestly, just have a third-party claims administrator on your side, somebody like us. There's no fee unless there's a recovery, and it pays off because they're missing out. And here's another example. We had a claim where we got the police report. The insurance company is listed for the negligent party. Call the insurance company. They say, oh, there's no policy that can be found. When a company hears that, right, what are they going to do? They're probably just going to say, okay, there's no insurance. Close the claim. I called up a second time to speak to somebody else. No claim, no policy. Called a third time. No claim, no policy. I mean, this was a real thing. I called 4 times, Amy. The fourth time, I got somebody on the phone that said, "Oh, there's a claim that's set up." And then we got a recovery. So I don't know if any other company has time to call 4 times or would do that in the course of their busy day when they're doing their core, job.
In some of these companies where it's maybe the owner operator is a husband and the wife could be the one back home getting all the loads, it's too much to handle and definitely seems like something you want to have someone with the knowledge about it to be on your side and to tell you what is it that you need to be looking for. Because it seems like with claims to me that there's always like hidden things that you have to be like picking out and finding out.
Sometimes carriers will, you'll say, okay, here, you'll present your claim and, you send them your estimate and, you just want the repairs. And that's great. And they might audit it and maybe send you 50%. And they'll just instead of telling you they're sending you 50% and having the conversation where you can, dispute it and present your argument, they'll just send it in the mail. So now you actually get the check. You're going to cash it and you're just going to move on. A lot of times those are forgotten about too. And that's like a very clever way for insurance companies to just pay what they owe, what they think they owe, and close their claim and, sometimes close claims on the owner operator side as well, because they don't know. They can go back or they don't have the time or.
When we've had other guests on and we talk about compliance and we talk about insurance, it mostly falls on the side of they didn't know. They do also have this predicament of not having the time, but mostly everything that could go wrong falls under the they didn't know situation. And that's really where we talk about cash flow also that comes into play for small carriers. After the accident, they got the repairs, the downtime, the expenses, waiting on insurance, waiting on claim payments. That's where we talk about having predictable cash flow, like with same day pay, so the business can actually keep on running if they have more than the plug, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there are sometimes where we could also collect lost revenue. And, sometimes the carriers will say, "Oh, no, that's loss of use." I'm like, "No, that's a separate claim." And in some states, we can collect both. So, it all depends. And, we go after whatever, they might be entitled to.
And then for carriers listening right now who already had an accident, how do they know if there's still money left on the table? Where do you begin looking? Or is the route to go directly to you and then?
Yeah. Because this is something where, you're an expert in something when you have 10,000 plus hours. It's not something I could say, well, there's a little more to it. But yeah, if they've had prior accidents, just feel free to reach out. We do a closed file review. There's no fee for that. And then if there's something we feel that might be owed, we'll go after it. We send checks. We don't invoice anybody. We send checks.
Could you tell us what does a closed file review actually uncover most of the time?
Yeah, so it could uncover loss of use and diminished value. Those are the two big ones.
Awesome. I think that's most of my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add or a direction we would like to go into with the claims topic?
Yeah, a lot of times I just want to say when people present their own claims, just because an adjuster tells you, the claim is denied, or it doesn't mean it really is. There's many times I've gotten liability decisions reversed and claims that were denied that were paid. So as long as you can substantiate your claim and reasoning, sometimes the adjusters are not knowledgeable with certain things and it goes to their attorneys, right? And then sometimes even the attorneys, we've had a claim where the attorneys reversed their decision and said, yeah, no, you're right, they owe the claim. So just have somebody on your side that knows how to present the claim. They, we know what to ask for, when to ask for it, how much to ask for. And
wow. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for breaking this down for us. For everyone watching, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. So maybe we can, in the future, maybe have a part 2 where we go more deeply into this. Or everyone watching, we will link everywhere where you can find Jennifer in the description of this video. If you have questions, if you are looking for a claims recovery officer, this is the person to go to. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these types of conversations. And before we wrap up, if you're an owner-operator or a small carrier running under your own authority, and cash flow is something you're trying to get under control, I'll leave the link in the description for Bobtail's factoring service. Same-day pay with no hidden fees. Made for truckers by truckers. Jennifer, once again, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Amy.